joining, but we always like to start on time. So it's
Perfect.
8 o'clock. All right. So good evening, ladies. The Peloton Moms Book Club is thrilled to welcome back Kristin Harmel for a second chat with a group about one of our most recommended novels in the group, The Book of Lost Names. Before we get started, a few quick thank yous. As always, thank you to Jennifer Crowley for all she does for the group. Thanks yet again to Kristin's publicist, the amazing Kristen Dwyer, for championing the PMBC with the literary world, it seems like. I think almost every author we've hosted this year is one of Kristin's. Thanks to all the moms who have, she is awesome. Thanks to all the moms who have already read the novel, they've recommended it to their friends, or are perhaps tuning into our YouTube page after the fact because you couldn't join us live. And last but not least, of course, thank you to you, Kristin, for taking the time out of your really busy schedule, it seems like right now, to chat with us. And I just wanted to share a quick bio on Kristin in case those of you don't know a little bit about Kristin. She is, of course, the New York Times bestselling and USA Today bestselling and #1 international bestselling author of The Forest of Vanishing Stars, which we chatted about, I think was that last July, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. And then, of course, The Book of Lost Names that we'll chat about tonight, The Winemaker's Wife. Highly recommend if you haven't read that book. It's one of my favorites as well. And then a dozen other novels that have been translated into more than 30 languages and are sold all over the world. Kristin was born in Newton, Massachusetts, about 10 miles from where I am right now.
That's crazy.
And she spent her childhood there, as well as in Worthington, Ohio, and then St. Petersburg, Florida. She attended the University of Florida and graduated with a journalism degree and a minor in Spanish. I have a question on that. Why not a minor in French? But and then she spent time living in Paris and Los Angeles, but now is back in Orlando, Florida, with her husband and young son. And if you don't follow it, you should. She's the co-founder and co-host of the popular weekly web show and podcast Friends and Fiction, and has been a huge inspiration to us at the Peloton Moms Book Club. So welcome, Kristin.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
She's awesome. So the Book of Lost Names has, as I mentioned, really become one of the most recommended books in our group. And I just wanted to kind of start off with having you share some of the authors who maybe have inspired your writing.
Oh gosh, there are so many authors who have inspired my writing. And, you know, it's interesting. I feel like I learn something from everybody I read. So, you know, when I started off, I started off writing romantic comedy. So I was reading a lot of romantic comedy. My first 6 books were rom-coms. 2 of them were young adult rom-coms, and then there were 4 adult rom-coms. And that was in my 20s. And I was reading, you know, Bridget Jones's Diary and The Devil Wears Prada and all, you know, whatever, like all of those books that were so popular at the time. As I've grown and have started writing historical fiction, which has been a little over a decade now, I think I just try to immerse myself in whatever sounds good. I mean, in and out of my genre. And I was just thinking that last night. I just finished Kelly Rimmer's new book. I don't know if you guys have ever had Kelly Rimmer as a guest or have read her. She has oh my gosh, you should. She's amazing. She's so funny. She has a great new book coming out I think it's in June, called The German Wife, which is a really phenomenal World War II book about a woman who is married to someone who's part of a Nazi party, and then a woman who's married to an American soldier, and their lives converge in 1950 Alabama. It's so interesting and such a nuanced look at, you know, what makes us who we are. But, you know, just every book I read, I feel like I take something away from. So Kelly Rimmer is a great novelist who I love reading. Kate Quinn, Pam Jenoff. I love reading outside my genre too. I just recently read V.E. Schwab's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which probably a lot of you have read. It's been enormously popular. I feel like with every sentence, I was thinking to myself, oh, like that would be a way to grow my writing, or, oh my gosh, how did she do that? That's incredible. And so I think there's just something to be said for reading what appeals to you and then learning what you can from it. I feel like I'm on a journey, and I feel like every book hopefully is a little bit better than the last book I've written because I'm constantly learning as I go. Does that make sense?
Completely. How did you transition though from rom-com to historical fiction? Because
Yeah,
that's
good
probably
question.
doesn't happen
So
very often.
it doesn't probably. And I think I was aided in the fact that I wasn't that successful writing rom-com. So nobody was like, wow, like what's this transition? It was just like, who's this person we've never heard of, even though she's been writing for 6 years. No, I think the thing was rom-com was never the right fit for me. I wrote my first book when I was like 24. It was 2003, 2004. It came out in early 2006. And I was in my early 20s. I was in my early to mid 20s at the time. I knew I wanted to write novels. I had been writing for magazines for several years. I knew this was my end goal, but I wrote what I thought I was supposed to be writing because I was a single girl in my 20s trying to figure life out. And so I thought, well, this is what everybody's reading right now. It really was the heyday of those, books we used to call chick lit. And so that's what I started off writing. I was kind of writing what I was living. And it felt like a fit at the time, but it never felt quite right. And I think the closer I got to 30, the more I realized I don't think this is where my career is going. But interestingly, when I pitched the idea of my first World War II book, which was The Sweetness of Forgetting, I pitched it in probably about 2009, 2010. It actually ended up coming out in 2012. When I pitched the idea, my agent said, first of all, well, that's not a Kristin Harmel book. And I was like, well, wait a minute, but I am Kristin Harmel. And she's like, yeah, but you've established this record of, writing these romantic comedies. I'm like, nobody's really reading me. So, shot that idea down. But then she said, honestly, I don't think you can do it. Which really gave me pause. I mean, this was the person who was supposed to be the advocate for my career, the person who was supposed to be selling my books to publishers. And she legitimately thought this wasn't something that I could actually accomplish. And so with absolutely no hard feelings, I still have very positive feelings about her. I left her and found a new agent and went ahead and wrote that book anyhow. And it became really the turning point in my career. So I always look back at that as a really good lesson about following your heart and following your gut, even if the people who are supposed to know what they're talking about tell you can't.
That's awesome. That's amazing. So inspirational because that had to have been a huge leap. Like,
it was. And I'm a person who, I'm a person who, I'm more prone than the average person, I think, to letting other people's opinions about me become my own. You know what I mean? Like I'm that if you said, Kristin, your hair is terrible, I would spend the next 6 months thinking like, oh my God, Jennifer thinks my hair is terrible. You know what I mean? Like I really internalize other people's criticism in a way that I shouldn't. Like I need to, that's one of the areas in which I think I can grow as a person. But it was especially hard for me because I really did internalize that. And it was hard not to. It was coming from someone who was a very well-respected agent and she was saying, you can't do this. So it was difficult, but I think clearly it was the right choice. And I'm
Yes.
glad I took that leap.
Okay.
Awesome. Oh, wait, Nancy. I think it's Nancy.
I'm sorry.
Can you mute real quick for me?
I'm going to mute right now. So sorry.
Thank you.
Somebody I know wants to get on and she can't. And she's terribly frustrated.
Oh no.
I told her how good it was. She wants to, she wants to join.
Well, worst case is we're recording and I'll have it up on YouTube, I promise, and as fast as I can. I promise. All right. So the Book of Lost Names is loosely based on a true story that I believe you started to become curious about while you were doing your research and writing of The Winemaker's Wife.
Yeah.
Is that yes? So can you share a little bit about like what you uncovered and how that blossomed into the Book of Lost Names?
Sure. So there was no real Ava Traub. Like she was a fictional creation. But what I became interested in while researching while researching The Winemaker's Wife, and also my previous book, The Room on Rue Amélie, was this idea that document forgers existed, right? I mean, I think both of those books involved the French Resistance. And in both of those books, there were mentions of people moving on to the next stop, moving on to safety using forged documents. And at the beginning of writing those books, it was just kind of something I took for granted. Like, well, of course there are forged documents. Every book you read about World War II has forged documents. Of course they would need them to move on. And of course they got them. Someone in the resistance gave them to them. But then I started to think, wait a minute, who is forging these documents? And how dangerous is that? And how do you get into document forgery? And how do you get trained for that? And, what are the risks? And how do you develop your skill? And how do you get involved with a network? And the more questions I had, the more I started thinking, I think this could be an interesting basis for a book. So I started doing a little digging and reading what I could, and it did feel to me like something that I could build a book around, because it was something I didn't really know about. And it was one of those pieces of World War II that is there, but that you've never really thought of the heroism behind before, right? So that really appealed to me, that idea. I think one of the threads that runs through all of my books is this idea of ordinary people finding it within themselves to do extraordinary things. And this fit very well into that mold. I mean, this is the true document forgers were completely ordinary people who often found their way into document forgery because they had to forge documents for themselves and their family members. And I loved the idea that you could find your talent in doing this, do it successfully for the people you need to do it for. And then instead of just moving on to safety, you could decide to stay. You could decide to use that talent to help others. That really appealed to me, but it didn't really become a fully realized book to me until my agent one day sent me a New York Times article about Nazi looted books and the search to return them to their rightful owners, which is a true thing. I mean, there really are millions of books that the Nazis took that are still sitting to this day, more than 80 years after the end of the war. They're still sitting in German libraries. And there are a handful of people who were working painstakingly to figure out, who these books belong to, who their descendants are, how they can return them to where they belong, but it's an insurmountable task. So as soon as she sent me that article, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, like this is the story that frames the story. Because during World War II, these people who worked for escape networks that involved children did find different ways to preserve the names of the children, as they do in the Book of Lost Names. But there were all sorts of ways of doing it. I mean, in some cases, they wrote the names down, for example, and buried them in the backyard. I mean, there were a million ways to do it. And I thought, what if they recorded the names in a book in code, and then later the book went missing and was looted by the Nazis? So it was kind of tying together those two ideas. And as soon as I had kind of connected that thread and, made that little knot, I was like, that's it. And my imagination just kind of started going.
It's awesome. I love it. So the story of the Book of Lost Names begins at the Sorbonne Library in Paris, and that's a place you have spent a lot of time in, and you've included it in most of your novels. So talk a little bit about the importance Paris has played in your personal life, and also the role it's played for you as a historical novelist.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it's funny because before you mentioned that that my minor in college was Spanish, and you said, why not French? And it was because I had no idea. I had no idea I was going to fall in love with France. It was not something I ever intended to do. I live in Florida, where Spanish was really the sensible language to choose if I were going to choose another language. And I thought, I knew I wanted to write novels one day, but I was initially going into journalism. And I thought that would be a really great addition to my skill set as a journalist in Florida. I'd be able to communicate more readily with more people, which felt like an important thing to me. Never once did I consider French. And then, let's see, I was writing for People magazine. I think it was 2002, if I'm not mistaken. And I'd been writing for People for just under a year. And my bureau chief called one day in April, and he said, hey, I have kind of a bad news, good news situation. And he said, the good news is we're going to continue paying you through the remainder of the summer. The bad news is you've maxed out your hours. And that's why we have to continue paying you all summer, because you've racked so many hours. And I was only allowed to rack up 35 a week. But like they had overflowed until the year was already full. So I found out I was going to get paid through the end of the summer every week regularly. But I could not work again until August 31st. And so I was like, what am I going to do for the next several months? I was young, I was single, I didn't have a lot of bills. And I went on a journalism website called Media Bistro. And on Media Bistro, they used to have like a bulletin board where writers could post things to each other. And I went on there, and a woman my age, a young woman my age named Lauren Elkin had just posted that she had an apartment a block and a half from the Eiffel Tower. Her roommate had just backed out for the summer, and she desperately was hoping to fill it with a writer in her 20s who could come and live in Paris for the summer. So the apartment had a full, it was crazy. The apartment it was the exact dates I needed to fill. I'd always dreamed of writing novels, and I was like, there's really no place better to write a first novel, right? And this apartment was $600 a month, fully furnished, with a full view of the Eiffel Tower from the living room window, the kitchen window, and the bathroom window, which, side note, if you can see the Eiffel Tower from the bathroom, the Eiffel Tower can see you. But I did not discover that until I put one of those coins in the binoculars on top, and I was like, oh, where's my apartment? And I found it, and I was like, and there's my shower. So yes, I had a brief career as a Paris peep show without knowing about it. But that summer in Paris really meant a lot to me. That was the summer I started writing my first novel. But most of all, it's the summer that I learned to kind of step off that endless treadmill of trying to achieve success. I knew I wanted to be a novelist, but I was never going to do it because I was so committed to like spinning my wheels, working, 60, 70, 80 hours a week as a magazine journalist, always kind of striving for that next thing. Living in Paris, even for those few months, taught me to stop and smell the roses, to slow down, to enjoy life, to give myself permission to dream things, and to give myself permission to have goals other than success. Happiness is a legitimate goal too. And I had not stopped long enough to realize that until I got to Paris. So Paris really played a very central role in forming me as an adult and forming me as a writer. And interestingly, the young woman I lived with, Lauren Elkin, writes books now too. So we both, out of that small little apartment, that one little summer, we both made kind of the careers we wanted to out of it. And then side note, that apartment was the apartment I used in The Sweetness of Forgetting. If anybody has read that book, that was my first World War II book. It came out in 2012, and my publisher is actually reissuing it this year for the 10th anniversary. I can't believe it's been 10 years. But that book, the apartment in the book that the grandmother lives in and the grandmother lived in during World War II, was my old apartment. And I was on book tour promoting that book in April of 2013. And I met my old roommate for dinner, and she said, let's go walk by the apartment. And I had just gotten over having the flu. I felt really lousy. I was like, I really don't want to. She was like, we have to go by the apartment. And I was like, why? Somebody else was living there at that point. So we walked by the apartment, and the guy I was dating at the time came walking up the other way. I thought he was still in Florida, and he got down on one knee and proposed to me right outside that apartment using a line from The Sweetness of Forgetting. So that is my husband I've been married to for 8 years now. But so Paris does hold a very special place in my heart for a lot of reasons.
That is a fantastic story.
It was a neat proposal. Yeah.
Maybe the most romantic story I've heard.
It would be more romantic if the night didn't end with me vomiting, because I think I was still getting over the flu. So like that, I just should not add that. I should erase that from my memory. But yes, it was incredibly romantic.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Fantastic. Wow. That makes me so happy. So the plight of the Parisian Jews is a story that has been told, right? But you crafted a very unique story, I think, because it encompasses the tragedy, the love, the heroism, the family, and the faith. And Eva and her mother are forced to flee Paris, and they traveled to, say that for me,
Orignon. I'm so bad at my French. Orignon.
That was pretty good. To hide. And almost immediately, I think the importance of religion is apparent, right? The second they get there, and you can see that there's the chapel is there, the cathedral, and that there's going to be a conflict, right? So Eva is caught in the middle of these two faiths. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of crafted that conflict? Because that's not an easy conflict to write.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I would say that Ava is caught between the two faiths. I think she is, I think she's always dedicated to Judaism. I think she feels That's who she is. That's where she came from. But I think she's torn between her mother wanting her to stand still and this idea that there's more life out there and that she can serve a purpose, right? So I don't think to me, she was never particularly questioning her faith as much as she was questioning her mother's idea of what her life should turn out to be. And I haven't intentionally set out to write about religion, and yet I end up doing it again and again. The Sweetness of Forgetting, which I mentioned, involves a storyline where, which was my first World War II book, involves a storyline where the Muslims of the Grand Mosque of Paris actually work with a Christian organization to help more than 1,000 Jewish people survive during World War II. And that was a real story. I mean, that's true. That's a true story from history. These three religions working together for the betterment of mankind, which I think is important. And I think I kind of keep coming back sometimes to this push-pull between different religions, this idea that, if we don't worship the same way, are we automatically separated, or can we find some common ground? And I think that maybe one of the reasons subconsciously that I write about that is that in my own family history, there are Jewish people and there are Catholic people. I mean, my dad's side of the family is mostly Jewish, but I won't get into my whole family tree. My mom's side of the family is Catholic. My dad's side of the family is mostly Jewish, but with some also Catholic intermarriages in there. And, it's this idea that on that side of the family in particular, there were intermarriages before that was really accepted. I mean, now obviously we don't think twice about it, but 100 years ago, it wasn't like that. 80 years ago, it wasn't like that. And for example, my dad's grandparents were a French World War I bride and her Jewish American soldier love, right? And they got married. And I just kind of think if those pieces of my past hadn't come together, I wouldn't be here. Like if those people hadn't kind of pushed back against the expectations they had, I wouldn't be here. And so I don't think I mean it as a statement on religion. I think that to me, as long as we're practicing goodness and kindness, and as long as we're thinking about others, we're all serving the same greater purpose. I mean, it's the same God. I mean, it's the same God. It's the same humanity that connects us. It's, and I think I try to write that way with the respect to all people who believe in a higher power. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't so much. Maybe the word conflict or torn between the two wasn't the right word, but I think her mom was, stuck back here for a few reasons, which we'll get to in just a second. But it was interesting, I think, in that time when they had just, lost her father, the husband, he's been taken away. But in turn, she turns to another faith really to kind of to help her or to give her purpose. I guess it's not her faith that she's turning to, but the Catholic priest is there, helping with the resistance. And to me, that was just an interesting transition from, why they're in this situation they're in to guiding her to help with the resistance.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
No, I don't know that I think that she was gravitating to the faith as much as she was gravitating to the goodness of the people who were practicing that faith. And I think realizing, I don't know. I mean, I think one of the most important things that historical fiction can teach us, and one of the most important things that history can teach us, is that we think that there are so many things that separate us, right? I mean, the world's been guilty of that so many times over, creating these divisions, creating wars, creating, all of these things that are about our differences. and in many cases about different religions. And I think what it comes down to, much like those Muslims of the Grand Mosque of Paris who, went out of their way to save, over 1,000 Jews. I think it comes down to just our shared humanity.
Right.
And I think that's part of what Ava is exploring. I don't think that for her, it has to do with religion as much as it has to do with like answering a call to make a difference in the lives of people, and ultimately really the most innocent people, these children. But you're right. I mean, her mother really wants, her mother's pushing back. I think her mother, especially because some of her activities take place in the church and under the supervision of a priest, I think her mother really does worry that she's abandoning her religion. And I think that gets kind of thrown into this whole stew of worries that her mother has. I mean, I think her mother is terrified of losing everything. And it's begun because she's lost her husband, right? Who's her entire security, her entire life, like everything she's ever known. He's taken away. She feels completely adrift. And then she sees her daughter beginning to drift away, not just beginning to drift away, but beginning to put her life at risk, which means now that on a couple of levels, she's at risk of losing her daughter too. So when I look at the way the mother reacts, I think it's less about religion really, and more about wanting things to stay just as they are and wanting them to stay as safe as possible, which means not taking the chance to do something that could risk her life. So I think that's at the center of the push-pull between Ava and her mother. Her mother wants to stand in place and just keep them safe, and Ava wants to do something with her life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. But I think it's interesting because I think if I'm not mistaken, at the beginning of the book, there's a line where the mom, she talks about that you can't shrink, right? You can't shrink away.
Yeah.
That's the mom, right? I think.
Does she? I can't remember. Yes, maybe.
I think so. Let me hold on. I meant to like write the whole quote down, but
you would think if I'd written it, I would remember every line, but no.
Well,
Like,
you've probably written a few words since then. But I thought she talked about that you can't shrink away. Yes, she says. But if we shrink from them, if we lose our goodness, we let them erase us. We cannot do that, Eva. We cannot. Right. And I thought it was interesting that she kind of leaves that belief, right? She does shrink. She ultimately is the one that shrinks back. And I guess, is it because of the loss of her husband? And she, I guess, what was that? How did she change? Or do you think?
Yeah, I think it is because of the loss of her husband, and because suddenly she's hit with this realization, which is terrifying. And that's that everything she has can be taken away in an instant. And, as the Peloton Moms Book Club, most of us are probably moms, right? As am I have a 6-year-old. I think we can all put ourselves, okay, so actually let me backtrack. I will say that, I think that in general, when you read a World War II book or when you think about World War II, it's tempting to think that if I were in that character's shoes, I would stand up, I would fight back, I would do the right thing. I would do the things to change the world, right? Like, I mean, I want to believe that about myself, but I also believe about myself that in the face of such horrific circumstances, my reaction might be the very common mom reaction of my entire job right now is to protect my child, right? And so to me, that's how her mom feels. Her mom feels like everything that felt solid about my life has been taken away. Apartment anymore. I'm not in Paris anymore. I'm not in a place where anybody speaks the language I'm most comfortable with, which is Polish. And I don't have my husband with me anymore. The only thing I have is my daughter. And my only value here is in making sure that she stays safe and making sure she's protected. I think a lot of people dislike the mother character, but to me, she's very human. She goes a little far. She gets a little angry. She pushes back a little too much. But I think it's a sentiment that if you think about it and you think about what you would do as a mom in that situation, it's a little bit easier to identify with, because all she wants is her daughter to be safe. And she genuinely does not understand why her daughter doesn't just want to stay safe also, and won't just take the documents and go to the Swiss border and, and live to be an old woman, right? Like, she wants to freeze time. She wants her to stop doing these things that she's doing. And the daughter, Ava, is saying, no, like, I have a calling, I have a responsibility, I can do something that helps. And so while the mother's standing in place, Ava's moving further and further away. And the mother's like trying to yank her back, but like the rubber band keeps snapping back and Ava keeps going further. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. I think, right. I think it's until it hits home, anything, right? I think,
Yeah.
until it hits home, it seems like the mother didn't really truly understand what
Yeah.
was happening in the war, right?
Yeah.
Until her husband's taken, and then, she talks about, well, what do you mean
Yeah.
he's at the camp and he can't leave? And,
Yes.
I
Yep.
think it's not really your reality until it happens to
Yeah.
you sometimes,
Yes.
unfortunately. And
It's so true. Yeah. I mean, look at what's happening in Ukraine, right? Like, I'm sure most of the people there didn't think that what's going on right now could have been a reality. It was this far off thought that, like, oh yeah, I mean, Russia's at our borders. He's kind of being menacing, right? But like, you don't know until it happens, and you don't know how you're going to react until it happens.
well, I can't believe that you just brought that up, because we're going to skip one question, but I wanted to actually ask you if you're comfortable talking about it, because I do feel like there's some similarities between the French
Yeah.
resistance and the citizens of the Ukraine,
Yeah.
and that history has certainly demonstrated that people are willing to sacrifice themselves for the betterment of their people. In your research of World War II, what do you think that the citizens of the Ukraine could use as inspiration right now?
Oh man. I mean,
I
gosh,
know.
they seem to me like they're very inspired themselves. I mean, gosh,
Yeah.
President Zelensky is amazing.
Yeah.
I am inspired every day by watching the way they're standing up against something that's impossible. Inspired and heartbroken as well, as I'm sure everybody is. It's a heartbreaking thing to watch unfold. Um, I think what we're seeing unfold now has very, very significant echoes of World War II. And that's really scary. It's really scary to watch. It's not the same situation, but there's an element of Poland being invaded in 1939 by Hitler. There's an element of a madman at the helm who's justified his actions, and who's going to, I don't know. I mean, I can't even get that much into talking about it, because it is absolutely heartbreaking. But I do think that even though that sadness and that tragedy seems to mirror history, I also think that the heroism that we're seeing now mirrors the history. And when you look at the history, there were a lot of lives lost, but good won out in the end.
Right.
And it took years. It took some shifting of national borders that happened, for a long time after the war. But I have faith that that the precedent set in World War II, and I'm sure before that, I mean, people were resisting occupation far before that. I think that serves as a model, and hopefully as an indication that good will eventually triumph over evil this time too. I hope.
Yeah. Well, I think all the, I think Poland in particular, but all the bordering countries that are stepping up to try and to house the refugees and to help get them out, certainly serves as an inspiration, and reminds me a lot of of this book, and people trying to help. So hopefully that's what everybody takes inspiration from, is the good of humanity and people trying to help in a tough time.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's go back to Remy and Eva.
Sure.
So they, for me, when they came up with the coding in the book, and the intimacy of that, because they just shared it really between they're really the only two people that knows that code. Their love really blossomed, I think, out of the crafting of that code, right? The sharing and the intimacy of that. And the struggle that Eva had, not to jump to the end, but after their night together at the Swiss border, for me, I was so cheering for her to be like, yes, come back to me, come back to me. And just talk a little bit about why you felt she had to keep her commitment to her family and her faith, and not to Remy.
Well, I think Ava felt very conflicted. And so first of all, I think she felt that she needed to return to her mother. I mean, she needed to make sure that her mother was safe. So that was certainly an element of it. But I think it was also that she knew her mother wouldn't approve because her mother didn't understand yet. And I think she cared about her mother. I mean, even think about this, like, think about the relationships we all have with our mothers. I'm sure there are times we've disagreed with our mothers, right? Like where they have one vision for how our life is supposed to turn out, or, what we're supposed to do, or the decisions we're supposed to make. And we have another. But for the big decisions, making a decision that would put you at odds with your mother for the rest of your life, really tough thing to do. And so I think it's Ava's hope that she can go back and convince her mother why she loves Remy, and that it's not a betrayal of where she came from, and it's not a betrayal of anything. It's just love. It's love is love is love, right? Like yeah. Love is like Lin-Manuel Miranda would say. It's love, and she just wants her mother to see that, because I think that despite everything, after everything, even after she's grown so much as a person and has grown so much strength, she's still a person who wants her mother's love and her mother's approval, but she also has to protect her mother. So I think all of those things go into it, and she's carrying a lot of guilt on her shoulders because of that. And so I think that's ultimately why she feels like she has to go back.
Yeah. So several moms would like to know if you have ever considered retelling this story from Remy's perspective in a second book. I think we could speak as the readers that we would cherish the chance to know where he went and how he helped the resistance, and, all the while leaving his heart with Eva. Have you ever thought about that?
No, I haven't, because I really, it's a great idea, but I from a writing perspective, I really think of my books as closed universes, if that makes sense. And, I think a lot of writers write with a series in mind. I feel like I take the characters on an arc that takes them kind of from beginning to end of the time during their lives where they're changing the most, where they're facing the biggest obstacles and the biggest hurdles. And so to me, when I finished this book, I was kind of done with this story. I had taken them on the journey I intended to take them on. There was an arc to it. There was a shape to it. People grew, people changed, people lived, people died. I totally agree that Remy's story would be interesting. I've also been asked a lot of times if I would ever consider writing the story of the children, like a couple of the lost children and what happens to them, because I think people have an interest in what happens to them. And I will tell you, I have listened to that because I've heard that in enough chats, enough book clubs. And the book that I am writing now, my second draft is due tomorrow. It'll be out in 2023. And it doesn't directly tell the story of the children, but there's a character in that book who has to flee Paris during World War II, and who winds up in the same church, the same priest's church, helping on the same resistance network. So we have a little glimpse of Remy. We have a glimpse of some of the children. We have a glimpse of the woman who runs the bookstore there, or the stationery store there, Madame Noirot, and the priest. I think I said that. So it's a little return for a few chapters to Orignon, and it shows you like a little bit of a different side of what was happening there. There are a few new characters and a little bit more of an intimate look at how children arrived at the houses and children were sent on to the next destination. So although I don't think I'll ever write a standalone about this again, like I said, I have listened, and there is a slight return to that town in the 2023 book.
Okay, well, that just got everybody excited. So can we pre-order yet? I don't think so. But
no, actually, you're right. I should zip my lips till a pre-order is available. It probably will be soon. The working title is The Paris Daughter. I don't know if that's the title that'll stick, but hopefully, I don't know. I like the title, so hopefully it will. We'll see. Hopefully it'll be available for pre-order soon.
That's awesome. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So I know we're at 8:40. Why did Eva, I could talk all night. Why did Eva not choose to share her story with her son? Was it a fear that she would reveal her love for someone other than his father?
I think it's guilt. I think it was totally guilt. Guilt that she shouldn't have been carrying with her, but that she was. She felt guilty over what happened to her mother. She felt guilty she felt very guilty over what she felt happened to Remy. She thought that, obviously she thought he died, and she thought that had something to do with her. She thought her mother's death was her fault. And I think that, ironically, for somebody who worked so hard to preserve other people's identities during the war, she fools herself into believing that if she can just become somebody else on the outside, she'll eventually become someone else on the inside too. So it turns out that really the last identity she has to preserve is her own. And it's this identity she's been working all these years to get rid of. So I saw someone in the comments say guilt, trauma, and I think it is trauma too. And I think people who survived World War II, and particularly Jewish people who survived World War II, have all sorts of reactions to the trauma that they went through. I think, Marlene's saying there are many complicated reasons that Holocaust survivors did not share their stories. And that's absolutely right. Some people emerged from that time period with a drive to tell their stories, to tell the world about what happened. A lot of people emerged from that time period and thought, I'm never going to speak of it again. I'm just going to start my life anew from here. And that's going to be the way I'm going to cope. That's going to be the way, I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to put all of that behind me. And I think Ava fell into the latter camp. She thought if she could just not speak of it again, stuff it down inside of her, it would cease to exist and she could become somebody else. So I think that's exactly it. It's rooted in the guilt and rooted in the trauma.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, ladies, any other last minute questions for Kristin before we kind of wrap it up? Because we're at 8:42. Anybody have anything that I tried to cover as many questions as you guys had given me? We're good. We're good. So I know for me, because I just reread this for my second time, I always have like the book hangover after I loved this book the first time, and I probably loved it even more the second time.
Thank you.
So what can we read? What can we read now? What are you recommending? What are you reading?
What am I reading now? Okay, so Kelly Rimmer's book that I just finished last night that I mentioned, called The German Wife. I think that's not out till June, but I think you will all love it. I think there's a lot to talk about as a book club. I think it's a beautiful book. It's a nuanced book. It's well written. I think that two books coming out later this month might appeal to you. One of them is The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn, which is a phenomenal book. And it's so interestingly timely because it's about a Russian sniper during World War II, a female Russian sniper. And there's a lot about sort of that specifically Russian mindset that Kate does such a good job of mining in this book. And I think it'll give you a little bit of a different perspective on what's going on in Russia right now. I think it's just an interesting time to read that book. My Friends in Fiction co-host, Christy Woodson Harvey, also has a book out on the same date called The Wedding Veil. It's a little bit lighter. It's it's half historical, but it's half historical, half contemporary. And the historical timeline is about Edith and Cornelia Vanderbilt, who were the two mistresses of the Biltmore estate, the big, huge Biltmore estate in Asheville, North Carolina. And the story in the modern day is about this bride who has left her fiance at the altar when she finds out he's cheated on her. And so the thing that connects the two periods is this wedding veil that the Vanderbilt women always wore and that went missing after Cornelia Vanderbilt's wedding. And so it possibly has turned up in the present day. So it's a little bit of a lighter read, but it's really good. It's emotional. It kind of has you asking a lot of questions about how to find your own happily ever after. So I really like that one a lot too. Trying to think what else. Oh my gosh, new last week that are amazing books that I could recommend. We're actually talking to them this week on Friends in Fiction. Both of them are our guests on Wednesday. One of them is Lisa Barr, who wrote Woman on Fire, which was such a cool book. It is mostly set in the modern day, but it's about a piece of art looted during World War II, which is interesting because it's kind of in that way similar to the Book of Lost Names, except those were looted books. But it's this painting that was stolen and this desperate search to recover it in the modern day. But the book is so good. And Sharon Stone has just optioned it to adapt it with herself starring in it, which is so cool. So it's called Woman on Fire. It's by Lisa Barr. That one's amazing. And then the other person we have on Friends in Fiction this week, which also her book came out last week, is Sisters of Night and Fog by Erica Roebuck. And it is, Sisters of Night and Fog. Yeah, Anissa's on there helping me with the names. Thank you. That one was phenomenal too. It's about two true life women who stood up to the Nazis and found themselves in a concentration camp together. So one of them is an American woman named Virginia Dalbert Lake, who served as one of the inspirations for my book, The Room on Rue Amélie. So it was interesting to see her kind of get her own story. And the other one is a British spy named Violette Sabo, I think is how you say her last name, who decides to go undercover in France with dire consequences. So it is a great book, super well researched. And if you liked the Book of Lost Names, I think that these are both books you'd really like.
Awesome. Perfect. Are there any plans to make a movie or miniseries of the Book of Lost Names?
Yeah, so the book's been optioned and it is moving slowly in that direction. I have a lot of hope about this one. I've had a lot of books optioned and nothing, the option happens that, you have some exciting conversations, people attach, people detach, you kind of go through the whole thing. I think this is the closest I feel like we've ever been, and maybe the best chance any of my books has ever had. So stay tuned, we'll see. There is a studio that is committed to doing it if we can get the right people attached, but it's just, World War II is tough. The period pieces are expensive. Female driven period pieces are a little bit more cost prohibitive. There are a lot of reasons why it's a challenge, but I'm hoping that this is one that can cute dog. I'm hoping this is one that can kind of overcome those challenges, but it has been optioned and we are moving down that road. So we'll see.
Okay, well, fingers crossed, as everyone is
crossed,
saying, it would be an amazing movie and it would be so fantastic. Thank you for joining us again a second time. I think you're our second repeat author, so
thank you for having me back. Thank you.
And we will continue to champion this book. And if you haven't read The Forest of
The Forest of Vanishing Stars. Yeah.
Thank you. I was going to say Disappearing Stars. My dog's distracting me. I'm looking at the book right over on my bookshelf right over there. It's fantastic as well, as is The Winemaker's Wife. I mean, all your books are amazing. But I know everyone's like, what do I read after this? And I'm like, go read one of our other books. If you love this.
Well, this one will be out in paperback on May 3rd. So if you're a person who prefers to buy in paperback and you want to hang on for about 7 or 8 more weeks, it'll be out in paperback soon. So thank you though.
And our chat is recorded on YouTube. So if you read the book, you can still go watch what Kristin had to say about that book. So yes. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for reading the book, everybody. You've all been so kind about it. And I don't comment as much as I should. just because I feel like I'm trying to stuff like 72 hours into every 24-hour day. There are never enough hours, but I do see a lot of the comments and they mean so much to me. So thank you so much for all the love and the kindness. And I notice it and it matters. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. Have a great night. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks.